Hey everybody, it's your friend and your guy and your favorite tiling window manager, Gardner. So a few weeks back we found out that Half-Life Alyx is coming to Linux with a native port written in Vulkan, or the rendering engines in Vulkan. This is exciting news. I mean, I bought a Valve Index specifically for Half-Life Alyx. There were a bunch of other games I wanted to try, like Beat Saber and whatever, but Half-Life Alyx was the game that really inspired me to get a Valve Index. The problem is that VR on Linux right now isn't great. It's not great. It could be better. So I'm excited to see where this goes. Half-Life Alyx coming to Linux, I think that that's great for Linux. But that's not the only way that Half-Life Alyx has made a big splash recently. The latest Steam hardware survey has dropped, and what's interesting about this is that this is the hardware survey that really coincides with Half-Life Alyx's release. And there's some interesting metrics here. See, while I bought my Valve Index back in like December or something, right around the time of Half-Life Alyx's announcement, it seems a lot of people didn't want to fully invest. I did it as a leap of faith because I had a feeling that Half-Life Alyx would be truly awesome and worth the price of admission. So I went ahead and did that. But it seems like most people, or a lot of people, waited for the game to drop, waited for the release, or waited for the reviews to come out, and then made their decision based on that. And if you look at the hardware survey, the number of people who have actually bought a head-mounted display has actually increased by a significant amount. What I find so fascinating about this is that VR finds itself in a similar position to Linux gaming just a couple of years ago. There was a small percentage of people on Steam who were playing these games or had this hardware or software, if you're following my metaphor, and you have all these pundits out there who proclaim that VR is dead because it only has 1.9% of all people on Steam playing it. These people fail to realize that these percentage numbers are absolutely redonkulous. Like, they're useful in context, but they're not useful in most other ways. Like, if you take into account the actual total number of people who have Steam accounts, are these numbers useful. But again, I find myself sympathizing with the VR community. I am both a VR gamer and a Linux gamer. And I find that the biggest overlap that I see personally is how we are using these numbers to actually defend ourselves. So if you look to Road to VR's numbers, they have some estimates on how many active users there are on Steam. They estimate that 141 million people have a Steam account. And so that would be representative of the Steam hardware survey. In April, 141 million users. Well, 1.9% of that is 2.7 or so million people with a SteamVR enabled headset. That is an impressive number. The fact that Half-Life Alyx single-handedly increased that number by like 60%, that's amazing. And like I said, that's exactly how I have been defending Linux gaming for forever. I mean, if you take the same numbers, 141 million, and you use the percentage point of people who are running Linux as their primary operating system in the Steam hardware survey, that's, what is that? 1.25 million people are using Linux to game. Now, again, that's a lot of people. Like, if you sold 1.25 million units of a game, you'd make a significant amount of money. I think that that's kind of rad. The two different niche gaming communities kind of have this one thing in common. But you know what else they have in common? Let's talk about this. This is very interesting. Earlier this week, Valve announced, or the SteamVR team announced, that they were dropping support for macOS from SteamVR. There's still going to be a legacy build available. You can enable it through the beta channels. But SteamVR is dropping macOS support. Now, the reason for this is pretty obvious. I mean, if you buy the one Macintosh that's actually capable of running a game in VR, well, then you don't have enough money left to actually buy a HMD. All joking aside, though, their announcement was pretty terse. let's look at it. SteamVR has ended macOS support, so our team can focus on Windows and Linux. We recommend that macOS users continue to opt into the SteamVR macOS branch for access to legacy builds. Curious, isn't it? I think that that's quite curious. I can hear all the pundits now. The pundits who are like, why would Valve want to only focus on Windows and Linux? Linux only has 0.8%. There are more Mac gamers than there are Linux gamers, and VR is only 1.9% of it. So how come there can't be that much overlap between Linux and VR? And yeah, I mean, I can understand that. Like, I honestly, I find this quite interesting as well. But I think there might be more to this story. And what's more interesting is that most of the games on Steam with VR support are more likely to have a macOS build than a Linux build, at least from my just glancing experience. So this has raised a lot of questions for me. Why are they canceling macOS support? Why are they focusing on Linux support? And why are they porting Half-Life Alyx to Linux natively? Why are they building all of these awesome tools like Proton, for that matter? And I think the answer is because they're going to try building a Steam machine again. Now, hear me out. I don't think that it's as far-fetched as it seems. First of all, because Linux is far more customizable, it's more optimized, and it's just more efficient than Windows. Plus, Windows is owned by Microsoft, and all of the weird and awful things that Microsoft are doing with Windows right now makes Valve very scared. While some might point to the fact that Steam machines are a tried and failed endeavor, I think that there are a bunch of differentiators from back then to now that means that a Steam machine could actually be quite successful. First, Valve themselves are back to making games. First-party games are system sellers, especially if they are timed exclusives. Yes, timed exclusive. If Valve wants a Steam machine to work, they have to have a first-party timed exclusive for the Steam machine itself. That will move units, that will get it in the hands of people, that will cause an install base that will then cause the rest of game developers out there to be like, oh hey, maybe we should port our games to Linux so it can be put on the Steam machine. Second of all, Proton makes for a pretty robust game library. Back when Valve started the Steam Machines initiative, Proton didn't exist. And since then, since Proton came out, it has enabled 6,000 games on Steam to be playable on Linux, games that only had Windows binaries. Third, Valve have worked hard to make sure that there is a SteamVR Proton bridge, a native bridge between SteamVR for Linux and Proton VR games. That means that it's more efficient for all of these SteamVR games to be playable on Linux through Proton. And critically, Valve have shown that they are now capable of building their own hardware. That's huge. Valve have created the Index, they've created the Knuckles controllers, they've created the Steam controller itself. Steam controller, still one of my favorite controllers to this day. I love the Steam controller. But the biggest problem that Steam machines faced was that Valve took a hands-off 3DO approach to building this ecosystem of Steam machines. And I think that that was an absolutely flawed approach. All these different manufacturers flooded the market with machines that had wildly different specifications and were overpriced. And that was a huge killer. That caused a ton of confusion in the market. People who were looking to just buy a Steam machine had to instead do a bunch of market research and know a lot about PC gaming already. That is not the market that Valve needs to be targeting here. It really isn't. And plus, having all these different hardware manufacturers out there with their different specs completely undermined the idea, the benefit of a console, having a single platform that all developers can target, and that software updates can improve the performance of. It didn't make any sense to me. Suffice it to say, it was half-baked. But today, we are in a much better place. The Linux gaming world is in a much better place. So if Valve tries the Steam Machine initiative again, but this time making a first-party console, just one, having a first-party title to launch alongside it, with timed exclusivity to that console itself, with Proton built right into the Steam client, and perhaps aimed at the VR space. I think that a new Steam machine in 2020 could be a tremendous success. So, all right, a lot of people are going to scoff at this whole idea, but here's why I think it's really important. The Steam machine that Valve would create, hypothetically, would not be aimed at PC gamers like you or I. The Steam machine would be aimed at console gamers. It would be running Linux, the Steam for Linux client. And by having it be a success in the traditional gaming space, allowing developers to get accustomed to writing their games for Linux for the Steam console, those games could then be played on Steam for Linux, and thus being able to move people away from Windows 10. That's a huge deal. That would be a game changer for us. And I think that it's really important, and I think it's something that Valve knows that they need to do. So I'd love to know what you guys think about this. Let me know in the comments what you think. I'd love to hear how wrong you guys think I am about this. Yeah, I'm curious. That's going to do it for this video. I want to thank everybody on Patreon, including Files Copying, one of my top tier Singularity members. Without them, I wouldn't be able to survive this pandemic. Also, I want to say, if you like what I do here, you can head over to my LBRY channel. All of my videos get released earlier on LBRY than they do on YouTube, and it's because it's awesome. I love LBRY. I think it's great. But yeah, that's it for now. I'll talk to you guys in the next video, and I hope you have a blessed day. Bye for now.